3 years. 3-year waiting list.
We have an update. After doing research, I discovered that you can actually go through this organization called Invitae, which is where the clinic that I was going to go to anyway does their genetic testing through. So I went on Invitae, I made an account, and you can do it through them to get genetic counseling. And they actually go through this other company called Genome Medical. Unfortunately, Genome Medical does not accept most insurances. So I had to pay for this completely out of pocket. It was $190 for that consultation. I didn't have to pay until the end of the consultation, but basically I answered this questionnaire. I told them why I was seeking genetic counseling. They had one specific to Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and I had to answer a ton of questions, enter in all my health information, basically any surgeries I'd had, all that. And then I had a 45-minute phone call that's up to an hour with the genetic counselor, where I just answered any additional questions that they had about things that I experienced, just to ensure that Ehlers-Danlos syndrome was the only thing that I really should get genetic counseling on, because they were really shocked that since I have a congenital heart disease that I hadn't had genetic counseling prior to that, because congenital heart disease aren't often genetic, but sometimes they can be. So they usually suggest that people who have them get genetic testing done, especially if they're going to have kids, which I don't want kids, so that's another reason why I hadn't had it done yet. But anyways, I answered all the questions. She was like, yeah, it definitely sounds like connective tissue disorder is the type of panel that we need to get you. So then we moved to that part, which is through Invitae. So Invitae is sending me a genetic counseling panel for connective tissue disorders. Now, it doesn't cover, I think, the TXNB gene, which is the genetic marker for what's called classical-like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and it's one that ideally would be tested, but apparently the process of testing it is really complicated compared to the other types of genetic markers. And it's also important for me to note that there is no genetic marker for hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So this is testing me for the other 12 types of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome that exist. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I strongly suggest going to the Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome Society's website. They have so much information on all of this there. And especially because I wanted to be tested in vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, specifically because of all the heart issues I've had, as well as periodontal. I've had dental issues my whole life. So that panel is supposed to come for me to do the test, similar to 23andMe, in the next 5 to 7 business days. You spit in it, do this information, blah, 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 put it in the post office, send it back, and then I'm supposed to have the information about my genetics in 2 to 3 weeks. And they said if there's anything that's like concerning, or if anything comes back positive, that I would get a call back from the genetic counselor, the same one I talked to before, that would give me information on it. So if all this comes back negative, because that's still a possibility, what does that mean? That means that actually I will then qualify for a diagnosis of hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome with my doctor, because when I went and saw my primary care physician in June, the issue is when you look on the Ehlers-Danlos Society's website, and specifically their diagnostic criteria, there's 3 criterion. The first criterion is hypermobility, so like the Baton scale, but there's also, because the Baton scale isn't super great, especially not in young people. I'm youngish, but I still struggle to meet the Baton scale qualifications because of injuries I've had from being hypermobile. Criterion 2 is comorbid issues, and there's 3 different ways that you can meet that criterion. And then the last one is that you don't have any signs or positive genetic markers for other connective tissue disorders. So in addition to all the types of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome that this is testing for, it's also testing for other connective tissue disorders like Marfan syndrome that have a genetic marker that they know exists. So if all of this comes back negative, like the other connective tissue disorder parts, even if some of the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome parts come back positive, that is enough then for me to take this genetic information back to my primary care physician and for them to say, okay, we can diagnose you with hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, so I don't have to wait 3 fucking years to see a genetic counselor or the genetics clinic in my area. I haven't decided if I'm going to cancel being on that wait list, or if I'm going to still try to see them, just because I think it would be really good to have a connection with a doctor that is specializing in Ehlers-Danlos syndrome in my state, in my area, even if I already have done the genetic counseling and done the testing. But all that to say, I'm feeling a lot better about it. The testing at Invitae, they do accept insurance. after I do the testing, I'm supposed to call them and ask about like billing information and whatever to see if they accept my insurance specifically. If they don't, I believe the test panel that I'm having done is about $250, which means that I will be spending close to $450, $500 on all of this out of pocket. But for me, it was worth it because I want to have this information as I'm navigating all of these other health issues that I'm seeing specialists for, so that I can say like, hey, look, I have this diagnosis. I need you to be like aware of this, especially because when you have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, especially hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, conditions that are rare for the typical population are not so rare in us. And so that would change the way that we approach treatment in other areas, like with my neurologist, with my cardiologist, with my GI, gastroenterologist. Like, it just is going to affects your whole body because it's connective tissue. It's everywhere in your body. But even if doctors don't necessarily know about it, having it on my chart, having a diagnosis of it is going to help me in the long run. And so I'm feeling really good about deciding to spend this money on myself. And also I want to thank everybody who supported me on my TikTok, because if I did not have this like additional source of income, I would not have been able to afford this. So it was solely through people watching my videos that I was able to afford to have this testing done. And I hate that it's something that people have to pay out of pocket for anyways. Like, shouldn't be this hard to get diagnosed with something, but I'm thankful that this opportunity was given to me. So thank you all.